Alright, so now that you know the basic exponent rules, the next thing is to know how exponents interact in algebra. There's only a few things you really need to know, so let's go over all of them. The first thing to remember is that algebra with things to the same exponent level are like terms, but if they're not to the same exponent, they are not like terms at all. For instance, if you do something like x to the fourth plus x to the fifth, these are totally different numbers. They don't mix at all. There's no simplifying there. It's just x to the fourth plus x to the fifth. Leave it alone. That's all there is to it. Now, if you have something like x to the fifth plus x to the fifth, well, then they're like terms. And then that just equals 2x to the fifth, because there are two of them. They're the same thing. So remember, when you're adding exponents that have the same variable, same exponent, then you can just make them like terms and combine them. But that's the only time you can do that. Same with subtraction. 5x squared minus 2x squared is 3x squared, etc. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when you go into multiplication. If you do x to the third times x to the fourth, in this case, what you're doing is actually adding these. What it ends up equaling is x to the seventh. And the reason for that is this guy right here, x to the third, is just x times x times x. And this is x times x times x times x. So if you think about it, it's just 7 x's multiplied by each other. X times x times x times x times x times x times x. And you're done. Then the same rule but kind of opposite goes for division. If you have something like x to the fifth divided by x to the third, well, then you just subtract. It equals x squared. And the reason for that is because, if you think about it, x to the fifth over x to the third is x times x times x times x times x over x times x times x. And what you do is just nail these guys out. They cross out, and you're left with this, x squared. And that's all there is to it. Now, things get a little bit more complicated when you take exponents to another exponent. So for instance, sometimes you'll have something like x to the fourth to the third. Well, in this case, you multiply these guys. And what it ends up being is x to the 12th. Now, you can think about it another way. On a simpler scale, if we have x squared squared, what this really equals is x times x times x times x. And so you multiply these because it's just x equals x to the fourth. And that's all there is to it. The only other thing I really want you to be careful of is that you don't mix things that don't have the same variables. So for instance, in cases where you have something like x to the fourth times y to the fifth, there is no simplification here. It's just x to the fourth, y to the fifth. There's nothing more to it than that. And aside from that, the only other exponent rules that I want you to remember are situations where you have exponents that are inside of fractions where you're squaring or rooting something. So if you have something like x squared over 4 and you're rooting this whole thing, remember you root both the numerator and the denominator, and it ends up being x over 2. So write these rules down, practice them, and get them all down, because if you have all of this stuff memorized, then you're going to be a pro. If you don't know these simple algebraic concepts, then when you take your SAT, you're just going to lose points left and right on things that you should be getting right in the first place. Cheers.